You ever stand your ground and suddenly become the villain? I thought I was just being a good parent, teaching my daughter an important lesson: respect, boundaries, the right to say no. But in one afternoon, that choice turned into a full-blown family war. My sister was furious, my nephew was screaming, and now she won't even speak to me. Was I too harsh? Did I overreact? Or was I just protecting my daughter? Honestly, I don't know anymore. So I need your take on this. Was I in the wrong? Or is my family overreacting? Let me tell you what happened. You decide. I'm a 35-year-old father, and my daughter Lily is my world. She's 7 years old, bright, and incredibly careful with her belongings. Among her favorite things is her collection of dolls, each one special to her in a different way. She spends hours playing with them, setting them up in little scenarios, carefully brushing their hair and changing their tiny outfits. To her, they're not just toys. They're her treasured companions. Last weekend, my younger sister, Sarah, came over with her 6-year-old son, Max. Sarah and I have always been close, but ever since becoming parents, we've had some differences in how we raise our kids. Max, while a sweet boy, has a lot of energy. He's the type of child who plays rough, often breaking toys without meaning to. I've seen it happen before. His own toys, toys at my parents' house, and even a few of Lily's in the past. Because of this, I've always been a bit cautious about what I let him play with when he's around. When Sarah and Max arrived, Lily was in the living room, completely immersed in one of her games. She had her dolls spread out in front of her, arranging them just the way she liked. The moment Max saw them, his eyes lit up and he ran straight for them. Before Lily could even react, he grabbed one of the dolls and started yanking at its limbs. I could see the panic on Lily's face as she instinctively reached out to take it back, looking up at me for help. Not wanting to cause a scene, I gently intervened. "Hey, buddy, those are Lily's special toys," I said with a smile. "Why don't we find something else fun to play with?" Max hesitated for a second, looking at me, then at Lily, then back at the doll in his hands. He clearly didn't like being told no. I could already feel the tension starting to build. And when Sarah overheard what I said, things took a turn I wasn't expecting. Sarah turned her head sharply, her expression immediately shifting to one of disapproval. "What do you mean, special toys?" she asked, walking over. "They're just dolls. Max can play with them." I could hear the edge in her voice, but I kept my tone calm. "Lily takes really good care of these dolls," I explained. "She plays with them every day and they're important to her. Max can play with any of the other toys around the house, just not these." Lily was still clutching one of her dolls, her fingers wrapped tightly around it. Max, on the other hand, looked annoyed. He held onto the doll he had grabbed, his grip tightening as if daring me to take it away from him. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Sarah scoffed, shaking her head. "Seriously? You're really not going to let him play with a few dolls? He's 6, for God's sake. He's just curious." I sighed, trying to keep the conversation light. "It's not about the dolls, Sarah. It's about respecting what belongs to someone else. If Lily doesn't want to share these, I think that should be okay." Max's frustration grew, and I could see the telltale signs of a tantrum brewing. He started shifting his weight from foot to foot, his grip on the doll becoming almost possessive. Lily, still frozen, glanced up at me, clearly waiting for me to fix the situation. Before I could say anything else, Sarah crossed her arms and let out a frustrated breath. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered. "Kids need to learn how to share. You're just spoiling her." I knew this was turning into something bigger than it needed to be, but I also wasn't going to back down. I had no problem teaching Lily about sharing, but I also believed she had a right to say no when something was important to her. And that was exactly what I was trying to explain when things started to escalate. Sarah's face tightened, and I could tell she was holding back her frustration. "So you're telling me that you're okay with raising a selfish kid?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You're seriously not going to make her share?" I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice measured. "Sarah, it's not about being selfish. It's about boundaries. Lily shares plenty of things, but these dolls are special to her. She should have the right to decide who plays with them." Max, meanwhile, was growing more impatient. He tugged at the doll in his hands, his face scrunching up in frustration. "I want it," he whined, his voice rising. Sarah gestured toward him. "See? You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. If you just let him play for a little while, this would all be over." I shook my head. That's not the point. Lily doesn't have to give up something she treasures just to avoid a tantrum. Sarah let out a dry laugh. "Wow. So this is what you're teaching her? That she doesn't have to compromise, that she can just say no whenever she wants?" I frowned. "Yes, actually. If something belongs to her, she has the right to say no." Lily, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke. Her voice was small but firm. "I don't want Max to play with my dolls," she said, hugging them to her chest. Instead of accepting that, Sarah scoffed again. "Oh, come on, she's a kid. She doesn't know what's best for her. You're the parent, act like one." That last remark stung. I felt my patience wearing thin, but I knew losing my temper wouldn't help. I looked at Max, who was now on the verge of tears, and then at Sarah, who was staring at me expectantly, waiting for me to cave. But I wasn't going to. Sarah's expression hardened as she realized I wasn't backing down. She huffed, throwing her hands up. "I can't believe you're seriously doing this." "It's just a toy, not some priceless artifact." Max, now fully irritated, stomped his foot. "I want the doll," he whined, his voice high-pitched and demanding. He held onto it tightly, and I could see Lily tense up, her eyes darting between me and her cousin. I knelt down to Max's level, keeping my voice calm. "Hey, buddy, there are so many other toys you can play with. We've got cars, dinosaurs, puzzles, you name it." I gestured toward the toy shelf nearby, filled with plenty of options. "Why don't we pick something fun together?" Max shook his head violently, his grip tightening around the doll. "No, I want this one." Sarah stepped in, her tone exasperated. "You're just making things worse. The more you tell him no, the more he'll want it. If you just let him have it for a little bit, he'd get bored and move on." I sighed, feeling my patience stretch thin. "That's not how this works, Sarah. Lily shouldn't have to give up something she values just because Max throws a fit." Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's mine." Sarah groaned. "Unbelievable. You're turning this into a bigger deal than it is." I looked at Lily, who was clutching her dolls as if they were her lifeline. Her little face was a mixture of frustration and unease. She wasn't being mean. She just wanted her things to be respected. Max, realizing he wasn't getting his way, suddenly threw the doll onto the floor. Lily gasped, quickly picking it up and inspecting it for damage. Her hands trembled as she smoothed out its dress, visibly upset. I stood up and faced Sarah, my jaw tightening. This is exactly why I didn't want him playing with them. But instead of acknowledging the issue, Sarah just rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, he's a kid. Accidents happen." I could feel the tension in the room thickening. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Max's frustration boiled over completely. Max's face turned red, his little fists clenched at his sides. His frustration had reached its peak, and before I could react, he let out a high-pitched scream. "I want the doll," he shrieked, stomping his feet so hard that the floor vibrated beneath him. His whole body tensed, and then, with no warning, he threw himself onto the ground, kicking and wailing as if the world had just ended. Lily flinched, holding her dolls even closer to her chest. Her eyes were wide, unsure of what to do. She had seen tantrums before. What kid hadn't? But this was different. This was aimed directly at her, at something she loved. Sarah sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid," she muttered, glaring at me. "If you had just let him play, none of this would be happening." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So now this is my fault?" I asked, my voice sharper than before. "Max isn't entitled to Lily's toys just because he wants them." Sarah shook her head, kneeling beside Max and rubbing his back. "Shh, baby, it's okay," she cooed, completely ignoring the fact that he was still thrashing around on the floor. Then, looking up at me, she added, "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. It's a toy, for God's sake." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "It's her toy," I emphasized, and she said no. Max's wails only grew louder, his little hands pounding the floor in frustration. Lily looked like she was about to cry, and I hated that she was being made to feel guilty for protecting what was hers. Sarah's patience finally snapped. "Enough of this. Just tell her to share it already," she demanded. But I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to teach Lily that someone else's tantrum was more important than her right to say no, and when Sarah realized I wasn't giving in, things took an even uglier turn. Sarah's face darkened, and she shot up from the floor, her movements sharp and tense. "I cannot believe how ridiculous you're being right now," she snapped, her voice laced with pure frustration. "You're seriously letting a 7-year-old make the rules?" I held my ground, my tone firm but even. "I'm teaching her that her boundaries matter." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Boundaries? She's a child. You're acting like she's some grown woman with a mortgage. She needs to learn to share, and you need to stop babying her." Lily shrank back at Sarah's tone, pressing her dolls against her chest. I could feel her unease radiating from across the room, and it only made me more determined to stand my ground. I shook my head. "Sharing is about choice, not obligation. She shares plenty of things, but I won't force her to give up something that's important to her just to avoid a tantrum." Sarah's eyes flicked to Max, who was still sniffling on the floor, but starting to calm down now that the attention was back on him. With an exaggerated sigh, she pulled him up by the arm. "Come on, Max, let's go. Your uncle apparently thinks it's more important to coddle his daughter than to teach her how to be a decent human being." Lily's lower lip trembled, and my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "That's not fair," I said, my voice low. "You're acting like I'm teaching her to be selfish when all I'm doing is teaching her that it's okay to have personal limits." Sarah scoffed, grabbing Max's coat. "No, what you're doing is raising an entitled brat." I exhaled slowly, keeping my composure. "And you're teaching your son that throwing a tantrum gets him what he wants." That was the final straw. Sarah's face twisted in anger, and without another word, she stormed to the door, dragging Max behind her. As she yanked it open, she turned back one last time. "Don't bother calling me until you figure out how to parent properly." Then she slammed the door behind her. The house fell into silence. Lily looked up at me with teary eyes, her small hands still gripping her dolls. "Did I do something wrong, Daddy?" she whispered. My heart ached as I crouched down beside her. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong." But as I held her close, I couldn't help but wonder if the damage to my relationship with Sarah had already been done. The silence after Sarah left felt heavier than I expected. I turned to Lily, who was still clutching her dolls like they might disappear if she let go. Her small voice broke the quiet. "Is Aunt Sarah mad at me?" I sighed, brushing a hand through my hair. "No, sweetheart. She's just upset." Lily hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with one of the doll's dresses. "Because I didn't let Max play?" I nodded. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong." She bit her lip, clearly still unsure. "I don't mind sharing some toys, Daddy, just not my dolls." I gave her a reassuring smile. "And that's okay. You don't have to share everything." My wife, Emily, walked in from the kitchen, having heard most of what happened. "Are you all right?" she asked, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I let out a deep breath. "I think so, but I doubt Sarah is." I was right. It didn't take long before my phone started buzzing with messages, first from Sarah calling me stubborn and selfish, then from our mum asking what had happened. I didn't want to get into it over text, so I called her back, expecting at least a bit of understanding. Instead, I got a sigh and a lecture. "Why didn't you just let him play, honey? He's just a little boy. You know how kids are." I pinched the bridge of my nose, already exhausted. "Mom, it wasn't about the toy. It was about respecting Lily's things." "But she's a child. She doesn't always know what's best," Mom argued. "And Sarah's your sister. Was it really worth upsetting her over something so small?" I felt my frustration bubbling up again. So what? I should have forced Lily to give up something that's important to her just to avoid a fight. Mom hesitated. "I just don't want this to turn into something bigger." "Neither do I admitted. "But I also don't want Lily to think she has to say yes just to keep the peace." Mom sighed again, clearly torn. "I just think maybe you could have handled it differently." I ended the call feeling just as conflicted as before. Emily squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. I wanted to believe that, but with my own family turning against me, I wasn't so sure anymore. The next few days were tense. Sarah completely ignored me. No texts, no calls, nothing. Normally we talked at least once a week, even if it was just to check in, But now it was like I didn't exist. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself she just needed time to cool down. But then, I started getting messages from other family members. Our cousin Jenna sent a simple, "What happened with Sarah? She's upset." Then my aunt chimed in, saying Sarah told her I was raising a spoiled child who doesn't know how to share. The worst was my mum again. She called me in that disappointed tone I knew too well. "Sarah is really hurt," she said. "She thinks you don't respect her parenting." I let out a humorless laugh. I don't respect her parenting? She was the one demanding that I force Lily to do something she clearly didn't want to. Mum sighed. She's just upset because Max felt rejected. I rubbed my temples. Mum, this isn't about rejection. It's about teaching both of them boundaries. If Max had a special toy he didn't want to share, I wouldn't force him. Mum hesitated. I get that, but sometimes you have to choose your battles. Was this really worth all this drama? That question stuck with me. I hated that this small moment had spiraled into a full-on family conflict, but at the same time, I didn't regret standing up for Lily. Emily noticed I was distracted and sat beside me. "Still nothing from Sarah?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. Just a bunch of people telling me I should apologize." Emily frowned. "For what? For letting Lily protect her things?" I exhaled. "Apparently for not giving in, for letting this turn into a bigger issue." Emily squeezed my hand. "You didn't let anything happen. Sarah is the one making this into a fight." I nodded, but I still felt unsettled. It wasn't just about Sarah being mad. It was the fact that our whole family was now involved, picking sides. And for the first time, I started questioning if I had handled this the right way. As the days passed, the weight of the situation settled on me. I kept replaying the argument in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have de-escalated things before they got out of hand. Maybe I could have found a way to make Sarah understand without her storming out. But then I'd look at Lily, happily playing with her dolls, completely unaware of the family tension unfolding around her, and I'd remind myself why I stood my ground in the first place. One evening, as I sat on the couch lost in thought, Lily climbed up beside me, her favorite doll tucked under her arm. "Daddy?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you mad at Aunt Sarah?" I sighed, wrapping an arm around her. "No, I'm not mad. Just a little sad." "Because she's not talking to you?" I nodded. "Yeah." Lily hesitated, then asked, "Did I make her mad?" My chest tightened. "No, honey, you didn't do anything wrong." She frowned. "But she got mad because I didn't share." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Sometimes grown-ups get upset when they don't agree on something, but just because someone is mad doesn't mean you did the wrong thing. Lily was quiet for a moment, then rested her head against my side. "I don't like when people are mad," she admitted softly. "Me neither," I murmured, and that was the hardest part. I hated conflict. I hated that this had caused a rift between me and my sister. But what was the alternative? Forcing Lily to give up something important to her, just to avoid upsetting people? Teaching her that her no didn't matter if someone else got loud enough? As much as I wanted peace, I couldn't teach my daughter that lesson. So why did I still feel so conflicted? Looking back on everything, I still don't know if I handled this the right way. I didn't want to create a rift in my family, but at the same time, I couldn't just ignore what I was trying to teach Lily. To me, this wasn't just about a toy. It was about showing my daughter that her voice matters, that when she says no, it should be respected. If I had forced her to hand over her dolls just to keep the peace, what message would that have sent? That other people's wants are more important than her boundaries, that it's easier to just give in when someone pressures her enough. That's not the lesson I want to teach her. But now, Sarah won't talk to me. My family thinks I was too rigid. And Max? He probably doesn't even remember this whole thing anymore. But somehow I'm the bad guy in the situation. So now, I'm asking you, was I wrong for not letting my sister's kid play with my daughter's toys? Should I have just given in for the sake of keeping the peace, or was I right to stand my ground and show Lily that her things and her feelings deserve respect? Let me know what you think.